What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, July 8th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Different graphic. Shout out to Davis for putting that together. Same show as usual, though. Did have some trouble getting lineups built the way that I wanted to talk about exposures today. So going to not have that, but we'll talk about how often players look optimal relative to their ownership and all of that, going through game by game. 13 games, going to try and be as brief as I can in spots that don't really look great to try and get through the show. But we'll touch on everything as usual using the Run the Sims projections that you see on the screen. You can subscribe using the link in the description below. 2 subscription options there. The fully detailed package that you see on the screen, $100 a month, downloadable, fully detailed projections out of our in-house play-by-play sim. Upload them wherever you build lineups and use them. If that doesn't make sense for you, we do also have the MLB Draft Caddy option, $10 a month, overlays the DraftKings projections directly onto your lineups page, so you can easily build by hand using the projections there. Also, our Discord is free, so check that out. Link in the description as well. We are around in there talking about the slate, projections, whatever you want to talk about. So check that out. Getting into it here, starting with the where'd the tab go? Starting with the Guardians and the Astros in Houston. Starting with Miami and Cincinnati. Looks like for whatever reason our banner is a little bit out of order. Starting with Miami and Cincinnati, Yuri Perez taking on Nick Martinez in Cincinnati. Got a good start from Jansen Junk yesterday. Didn't matter for me personally. Still got my ass kicked. But we have a $6,000 Yuri Perez here, $7,100 Nick Martinez. Not much ownership right now coming in to either guy. About 8% coming into Perez, about 2% coming into Martinez. I don't have a ton of interest in Martinez here. He's kind of just a run-of-the-mill starter. He does have a good matchup against Miami. Not the best offense, but also not a great park to pitch in. And you have a million pitchers today, so not a ton of interest in Martinez. I do have a lot of interest in Yuri Perez, and I'm a little surprised that the ownership right now isn't higher. He has only thrown 22 innings so far this season, but he has really, really good stuff. 117 stuff plus grade so far, averaging 98 miles an hour on his fastball. His command isn't very good. Control isn't very good. Can certainly get himself into some trouble. He's not safe by any means. He's still a very young, raw pitcher, but the stuff is really good. 22.5% K percentage so far this season. At only 6K, I am interested in him, especially if the ownership does stay as low as it is. I think he's a way that you can get an expensive SP1, some expensive stacks into your lineup without sacrificing upside. He certainly still has a very high ceiling here. So he is somebody that I'll be interested in paying attention to his ownership as the day goes on. But right now, do think he's going a little bit under-owned. You can see we have a very good point per dollar projection on him on the screen. So definitely interested in getting to some cheap Yuri Perez here, even though it is obviously a risky spot in Cincinnati. Wouldn't be shocked if his ownership does come up a little bit throughout the day. But for right now, pretty much across the industry, very similar ownership projections to my own. So doesn't look like he's likely to get a ton of ownership, at least right now. I do think he is a high upside, good value option here. So I am interested in him despite the risks. Moving on to the bats here, starting on the Miami side against Nick Martinez. Had a ton of them yesterday. They kind of came through. Agustin Ramirez homered, so that was nice. Xavier Edwards had a nice game. Jesus Sanchez hit a couple balls hard, but didn't do much in the way of actually scoring fantasy points. I think they look pretty good here. Again, you're getting like 5, 6, 7% ownership to most of these guys. I think that they're going a little bit under-owned given the park upgrade that they get, given the decent matchup against Nick Martinez. He's not a pitcher that gives up a ton of power, but doesn't miss a ton of bats either. So I do have interest in a pretty inexpensive Miami team in Cincinnati. So far this season, a 173 expected ISO to right-handed hitters for Martinez, 184 to lefties, 20.5% K percentage to lefties, 14.5% to righties. Agustin Ramirez, Jesus Sanchez, Xavier Edwards looking like the top options here, but also like Otto Lopez and Kyle Stowers. Those 5 all look pretty good. The most expensive of that group is Stowers at 4,500, followed by Edwards at 4K. So pretty decent point per dollar projections. There is home run upside with these guys. I mentioned it yesterday with Jesus Sanchez, but against right-handed pitching so far this season, 253 expected ISO for Sanchez, 220 for Otto Lopez, 219 for Ramirez, 308 for Stowers. There is actually a lot of power upside in the top part of this Miami order that I think people kind of just sleep on because Miami as a whole isn't a very good offense. They play their home games in a park that isn't great for hitting home runs, but they're not playing in Miami tonight, so that doesn't matter. And I think they're a little bit underpriced for the upside that they offer here in Great American Ballpark. Michael asked about Yuri Perez going deep into games. Generally not particularly. They are usually relatively cautious with him, but he is fully stretched out. He threw 93 pitches 2 starts ago against Arizona. He did go 6 innings in his most recent start against Minnesota. That is the deepest he's gone into a game. It's the first time he completed more than 5 innings, but we have seen them ramp him up. We saw, like in his first start coming back from injury against Pittsburgh, he went 3 innings through 70 pitches. They were like, okay, that's enough. You do have him allowed to go 90 plus pitches, go 6 innings. It's more at this point of an efficiency issue with him. Somebody that does have good strikeout stuff, but also walks too many guys, works deep into games. The efficiency is a concern, but it's also a concern that is in large part mitigated by the fact that he's only $6,000. On the other side, offensively for Cincinnati, not looking like I'll get to too much of them here against Perez. Obviously, if you get to Elly De La Cruz, that is fine. He's 5,600. You're going to have plenty of good shortstop plays on this slate. 10% ownership coming into him, 4 to 5% chance of being optimal using our projections. Everybody else on Cincinnati is lower than that. One thing I will point out here for the Reds, this is a team that does have some speed. Obviously, Elly De La Cruz in particular, somebody that we know will run a lot. Very high stolen base projection for him. Agustin Ramirez, if he is behind the plate, has been terrible at throwing runners out so far this year. Tweeted about it yesterday, but it was my first time actually, I think, watching part of a Miami game with him catching. He has been really bad defensively. Had a really bad pass ball on a fastball right down the middle yesterday, just didn't catch it. Then immediately allowed another wild pitch. Like, it was a wild pitch because it bounced, but it was a pitch that should have been blocked and wasn't. But they also mentioned on that broadcast that he's thrown out like 4 or 5 out of 40 potential base stealers. So that is something that we could expect Cincinnati to take advantage of if they get on base against Perez. I do think that there is pretty significant stolen base upside here if Agustin Ramirez is catching. Next, we have the Rockies taking on Boston. This game sort of ended up getting there yesterday, which was pretty annoying if you didn't play Boston. They got there against the bullpen. Obviously, that is part of the reason that Boston does always look good here. The Rockies bullpen is not good, so you do get the ability to add on runs throughout the game. Brian Bayo taking on Kyle Freeland in this one. No ownership coming into Freeland. Technically going under-owned, but probably somebody that you can mostly ignore on a 13-game slate. Brian Bayo likely to get a lot of ownership here. He is, in most places, projected for around like 20-ish% ownership today. I wouldn't be surprised, at least with the way things look right now, if that ends up coming in higher. Looking at some of the Sims tools that are available, they have Bayo looking like a play that they want to jam in. So I do think you could see ownership end up, coming in a bit higher for him. Generally, the spots where ownership does miss these days are when you get a pitcher that projects well in terms, or a player rather, that projects well in terms of actual projection and points per dollar. I do think that is pretty much, for the most part, the case here with Bayo. He's only $6,600. He has a great matchup against the Rockies. Our projection of nearly 15 fantasy points is actually a little bit lower than other places in the industry. Not by a huge mark, but he's somebody that does have a relatively high raw point projection and also a very good point per dollar projection. He's cheap. He's in an obvious matchup against the Rockies. I do think you could see the ownership on him steam a little bit. He is a good point per dollar play, no doubt about it. Not a great strikeout pitcher, but Colorado obviously adds plenty of strikeouts on their own. It's pretty much just been a cheat code taking pitchers against Colorado all season long. Yesterday, no exception, with Dick Fitz having the big game there. Bayo overall this season, only striking out 16.7% of hitters, 95 stuff plus grade. Command has been about average, down from last year. When he's on, he is somebody that gets a lot of ground balls, can generate some strikeouts, but we haven't seen the strikeouts as much this year as in the past. But again, Colorado just gives you strikeouts. They are outside of Coors Field, so while they are still in a good hitting environment in Fenway, the ball does move more than it does in the altitude in Denver. So you do expect a higher strikeout percentage away from Coors for Colorado. They already have the highest strikeout percentage in baseball against right-handed pitching at 26.5% this year, 76 WRC plus. Very obviously a good spot to get to Brian Bayo. Offensively here for the Rockies, if you do want to get some negative correlation against Bayo, it is a good park for offense. It is a good hitting environment, but you do have a relatively low total here for Colorado. No ownership coming into them. If you are going there, Goodman, Beck, Freeman, Estrada, McMahon, probably the 5 that you're going to go to first. They all have like a 3 to 5% chance of being optimal at no ownership. So not priorities here, but you do get that negative correlation against Bayo. On the other side, Boston is probably once again going to be popular. 13-game slate, so raw ownership numbers should be kept in check a bit. But I'll say the same thing about Boston that I said yesterday. I think they're being underprojected ownership-wise. They are once again just being jammed into lineups by some Sims tools. They give you a really strong combination of high actual projection and high point per dollar projection. You can see here, again, looking at our projections, pretty much the entire team projected for more than 2 DraftKings points per 1,000. So they look just really good from a point per dollar standpoint. The actual projections are relatively high as well. Most of these guys around 8, if not higher. So some places have them projected for like 8% ownership. I have it a bit higher than that in most spots, or at least in some spots. I think in particular, you see Nate Eaton get more ownership than is being projected. I think you see Romy Gonzalez get more ownership than is being projected. Those are the 2 that are really jumping out to me right now as guys that I think are likely to get steamed. They're just really, in the case of Eaton, inexpensive, but he does come with big pinch hit risk. Talked about it some on the show yesterday. Again, for whatever reason, our early in the day lineup provider doesn't have him projected in, but against the lefty Freeland, you will probably get him starting and leading off. So you're going to have this $2,500 bat that is a good point per dollar projection in Fenway on a team with like a 5.5 total. He's going to end up in a lot of lineups. He's also probably going to get pinch hit for as soon as you get into that Rockies bullpen and a righty comes in. So that is something to keep in mind as well. I think the ownership just ends up coming in higher than the 8 to 9% ownership that's being projected to him right now. But clearly a good spot for the Red Sox, and you will see lower ownership most likely on them than you did yesterday, just because there's like twice as many games, give or take. So good spot and ownership. They'll still be one of the highest owned teams on the slate, I think, but it should be a bit a bit lower in terms of raw ownership than it was yesterday. Again, I would expect Gonzalez and Eaton to be the 2 highest owned guys here, followed by probably Story and Refsnyder. So just find a way to make the ownership work if you want to go there, but they are still obviously a good stack. Next, we have the Dodgers taking on Milwaukee in Milwaukee. Clayton Kershaw going for the Dodgers, Jacob Mizorowski going for the Brewers. $7,700 price tag on Kershaw, who has been pitching a bit better since a rocky start to the season coming back from injury. Mizorowski coming in at $9,300. Unbelievably good stuff for Jacob Mizorowski, but again, a difficult matchup for him and a pretty expensive price tag at $9,300 makes it difficult to want to get much of him. He's not getting any ownership, so you could make the argument of this guy's stuff is insanely good and nobody's going to play him, but it's a tough strikeout matchup against the Dodgers. It's a very good Dodgers offense. Obviously, you can still have a good game against them. Freddie Peralta scored like 27, I think, DraftKings points yesterday. It can be done. Mizorowski's averaging 99.3 miles an hour on his fastball so far this season. Pretty close to average command. 122.5 stuff plus grade is far and away the best stuff on this slate. 28% strikeout percentage so far. You can very easily make the low-owned talent argument for Mizorowski, but at the same time, there are so many pitchers today, and taking one against the Dodgers isn't really at the top of my list of things to do. Similarly, for Kershaw, no ownership really coming into him. About a 5% chance of being optimal at 7,700. Milwaukee, obviously not nearly as good offensively as the Dodgers are, but they are still a pretty difficult team to strike out. You're going to have plenty of other pitching that you can get to. So far this season, Kershaw striking out 17.5% of hitters. Stuff plus grade is down from last year. Command has been somewhat below average, only averaging 89 miles an hour on his fastball, which is down about a mile per hour from last year as well. So not a lot of interest in either of the pitchers here. Dodgers bats against Mizorowski. You're making kind of the same argument for them that you would be if you wanted to play Mizorowski. He's very, very talented, but he is an unproven pitcher. He's only got a handful of major league starts, and now he's going up against this lineup that has Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Will Smith, Freddie Freeman, etc. Shohei Ohtani getting 15% ownership at 6,500, 11% chance of being optimal. He is the best hitting play from the Dodgers as usual. Beyond that, about a 5% chance of being optimal for $4,600 Mookie Betts at shortstop, less than 5% for everyone else. Sub 5% ownership to the entire Dodgers lineup, though, with the exception of Shohei Ohtani. So I think they are one of the teams that is kind of just going to be in this bucket of, hey, they're talented. If you want to play low on Dodgers, great. But they certainly don't stand out as a priority. They're not the highest projected team because Mizorowski is good. They're not the best point per dollar team or even close to it because they are expensive. So if you do go to the Dodgers, it is mostly because the range of outcomes is certainly favorable to the ownership. A good game, from Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, Smith, this lineup obviously comes with a lot of home runs, some stolen bases. But from a median standpoint, they are difficult to get to because they're relatively expensive and not in a great spot. They are a little bit cheaper than usual, though. I do think it's important to point that out. Freddie Freeman is now sub 5K. Shohei is still 6,500, but that's 4,600. Smith is down to 5K. Conforto's 3K. Pages is only 4,200. Hernandez, if he happens to be in the lineup, is 4,300. So they are a little bit cheaper than usual. Still expensive relative to other teams, but you have seen pricing as a whole come down a little bit on the Dodgers here. Milwaukee on the other side against Kershaw. 5% ownership coming into Contreras. 5% coming into 2K flat Andrew Vaughn. Those guys look okay, but still not priorities for me. 2 to 3% chance of being optimal for Contreras and Vaughn is the high mark for Milwaukee. Like I said, Kershaw hasn't been great so far this season. I mean, hasn't necessarily even really been good so far this season, but there's just so many offenses on the slate. 179 expected ISO so far to righties, 115 to lefties. So Kershaw hasn't been a gas can in the sense of giving up a ton of offensive production, a ton of expected power. It's more so just been that he's a shell of his former self in terms of getting strikeouts, in terms of being a DFS pitcher. Contreras, I've talked about this on shows before. It's been pointed out in chat. He's also struggled with left-handed pitching for the last couple of seasons. You don't want to read into that too much necessarily, but it is at least worth noting that he's been a reverse splits hitter. That is always something that's a little bit more difficult, I think, to make sense of from a DFS standpoint, because especially when you're talking about righties hitting lefties worse, one, it's just kind of always going to be a sample size issue because they don't face nearly as many lefties as righties. But also when you get a reverse splits pitcher, you can dig into what they're throwing and pretty quickly figure out if you think it's sustainable or not based on if they have pitches that are expected to do better against opposite-handed hitters than same-handed hitters. You can't really do that with hitting. Like, you can't get into the guy's eyes and figure out, does he see the ball worse from the left side? Does he struggle to square up pitches that are breaking into him? Like, you can, look at pitch type data, but then you're still running into that sample size issue, and it's kind of just going to probably confirm the reverse splits that exist to date. It's a lot more difficult, I think, to kind of definitively come up with a conclusion for hitters saying, oh yeah, I think this guy's going to struggle with lefties going forward just because he has over the last couple of seasons. At 4,100, I still wouldn't shy away from Contreras just because of that stat. He does, he is still a good hitter, does give you some stolen base upside, etc., but he's still not looking like a priority on this slate. Beyond Contreras and Vaughn, not a lot to see, I don't think, from Milwaukee here against Kershaw. I did mention it with Vaughn, though. He is 2K flat. He's a flawed hitter. He hasn't lived up to the hype that came with him when he was drafted, I believe, 3rd overall. But he does still have raw power. Ivan said, why don't you play on FanDuel? Variety of reasons. Time constraints. Their tournaments aren't big enough. It's just not really worth the time. Also, have more issues getting money onto the site. Me personally, Maryland, the state of Maryland has laws about deposit limits, and the books, or the sites rather, have the discretion to kind of change them as they see fit. I have a lot of DraftKings has a much higher deposit limit for me than FanDuel. FanDuel has not increased it enough to where I can consistently even keep enough money on the site to play my normal volume. So I mostly just ignore FanDuel for a bunch of different reasons. Mostly it's time constraint, and like if I could play for 50K to first, 100K to first every night on DraftKings, and then FanDuel is going to run out something that is like 10K to first, I'm going to just ignore FanDuel. Moving on to the Cubs and the Twins in Minnesota. For the Twins, we have Simeon Woods Richardson. For the Cubs, we have Shota Imanaga. Woods Richardson coming in at 6,800 in a brutal matchup against the Cubs. Tough strikeout matchup, good power, offense, etc. Imanaga, 9K. Decent projection here against the Twins, but not enough to look like a priority on this slate. 3% ownership to Imanaga, basically none coming into Woods Richardson. I don't think either of them really deserves it. 5% chance of being optimal for Imanaga. He has had power issues so far this season. I do think that's important to point out here. Righties so far against Imanaga, only striking out 16.5% of the time with a 265 expected ISO. Lefties, 24.5% K percentage, 143 expected ISO. But you will probably get a right-handed heavy lineup from Minnesota here. They are a team that has plenty of right-handed bats. You could get an entirely right-handed lineup. Buxton, Jeffers, Correa, Castro, France, Lewis, Bader, Lee, Vasquez. One projected lineup that I'm looking at right now. So you're probably going to get a lot of righties here. That's not good for Imanaga's strikeout upside, and he has struggled to limit the quality of contact as well. Moving over to the bats here, it is a good spot for the Cubs. The issue that you will potentially run into is, again, they're just really expensive. And when you consider that there are 25 other offenses, and most of those offenses are a lot less expensive, I think that it's pretty easy to see the problem you could potentially run into, where even if the Cubs do have a good game, there's going to be offenses that are considerably cheaper that probably score a similar amount of fantasy points just based on the number of teams that are cheaper and exist today. But at the same time, Chicago does consistently give you one of the highest ceilings of any team on the slate, because not only do they have a lot of power throughout their lineup, but they also run a lot, and they have a lot of guys that steal bases. This team has a lot of guys with, pretty decent stolen base projections and home run projections. If you look in our projections here, you can see, stolen base upside for Horner, for Shaw, for obviously PCA and Tucker, but you'll get some stolen bases from Swanson, from Suzuki, from Happ. They don't run to the same extent, but they will run at least a little bit. And then you look at the home run projections, and Tucker, Crow Armstrong, Suzuki, all massive power upside there. Michael Busch has a lot of power upside. Swanson can hit some homers, so can Happ. Kelly has power. And then Horner and Shaw, not like elite power hitters or anything, but they're not complete zeros either. So a lot of combination home run and stolen base upside does make the Cubs pretty much always one of the highest upside offenses on a slate. It's just a matter of, can you get to them? Woods Richardson so far this year, only a 141 actual ISO allowed to righties, 223 expected ISO. So he has been pretty lucky in terms of limiting power to righties this year. 176 expected ISO to lefties. Strikeout percentage to lefties is 7 points lower than it is against righties. So that does set up, from a strikeout standpoint, better for Happ, Tucker, Crow Armstrong, Busch. But again, Suzuki, Swanson, Kelly in good home run spots here as well. So I do like the Cubs if you can get to them. And they are likely to be pretty low owned. About 5% projected ownership across the board to the Cubs. 8% to Kyle Tucker is the high mark. From an optimal standpoint, 5 to 8% chance of being optimal for pretty much everybody in the lineup other than Matt Shaw, who's a little bit lower at 3 to 4%. So I do think the Cubs right now at least are going a little bit under owned. I like them as an offense. It's just a matter of, can you make it work? This is a spot that also goes back to Yuri Perez, for example. Especially if Yuri Perez's ownership remains low, getting a team where you have Yuri Perez to save some salary at SP2, and then you can pay up to the Cubs at low ownership, becomes really appealing because that is a really high ceiling. Again, there's a lot of risk that comes with Yuri Perez, but just from like a ceiling and what does it look like when things go well standpoint, there's a lot of strikeout upside for Perez. There's a ton of upside for the Cubs. That sort of pairing would make a lot of sense if Perez's ownership remains low and the Cubs' ownership remains low. That's probably one reason why I think the Cubs are going under-owned, is the fact that I think Perez point per dollar is a really good play. So there's an SP2 that I actively like the strikeout upside there. And then he's going to allow me to get to more Cubs as well. Minnesota on the other side against Imanaga. Lower team total here, coming in at around 4.5. But like I said, you do have a lot of power upside for the right-handed bats. They aren't really showing up right now in what I built before the show as far as optimal rates. 3 to 4% for Buxton and Correa is the high mark. But in my head, at least, I actually like Minnesota a little bit more than it seems like the projections do at the moment. Just because, like I said, you have that power upside against Imanaga. He has struggled with right-handed power this year, but you also have really, really cheap prices on the Twins outside of Byron Buxton. Buxton coming in at 6,100, obviously in his own pricing tier there. If you can get to him, great, but he is expensive. But then you have a $3,200 Correa, $3,300 Jeffers at catcher, Royce Lewis, 2,800. He's struggled this year when he has been healthy, but we've seen in the past what he can do offensively. It's probably just a matter of time and shaking off some rust, getting timing back, for him to end up producing again. But he's really cheap, so you're getting a discount that is basically completely pricing in the struggles we've seen from him overall this season. Since the start of last season against left-handed pitching, 268 expected ISO for Buxton, 157 for Jeffers, 222 for Correa, Ty France at 194, Bader at 185, Lewis at 196. There is plenty of power upside for mostly cheap in this lineup if you want to go there. So again, it doesn't really look like a priority for me right now, but I do think it's important to point it out because in my head, at least, I think it actually looks pretty good. Blue Jays taking on the White Sox in Chicago. For the Blue Jays, we have Chris Bassett. For the White Sox, we have Aaron Savali. Really tough strikeout matchup for Savali here. I did bet over 3.5 strikeouts earlier, but not a spot that I think I would actually want to get to in DFS. He is only 5,500, but I just don't think you're really going to need it on this slate. I would, again, just rather go to Yuri Perez if I need a pitcher in this price range. Bassett on the other side, getting about 6% ownership at 8,300, 7% chance of being optimal. He's fine if you need a mid-range pitcher. The matchup against the White Sox is obviously good. They're one of the weakest offenses in baseball. Their active roster ranks 9th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They rank 29th in WRC+. But again, Bassett just isn't a huge priority on this slate because I've already talked about Yuri Perez, but you also have Brian Bayo at 6,600, the probably much more popular paydown option, somebody else that you can use to get to the Cubs if you wanted to. I think it's a slate where you're probably going to see, for the most part, the mid-range pitchers kind of squeezed out because you have high upside value options in, for example, Bayo and Perez. And then you've got, the top tier pitching options. So pitchers like Bassett end up being a little bit contrarian, even though they have good matchups against the White Sox, just because they're not the highest projected plays. They're not the best point per dollar plays. And when that's the case, you kind of just get squeezed. So from a contrarian standpoint, I think Bassett looks fine, but I wouldn't call him a priority just because of the way that pitcher pricing is on this slate. I think, for lack of a better phrase, it's almost like pushing you towards stars and scrubs, something that anybody that plays NBA DFS is familiar with. That's kind of what the pitcher pricing is pointing you towards. Offensively here, about a 5.5 team total for the Blue Jays against Savali. They look good. They'll probably be relatively popular. But again, on a 13-game slate, that's not as problematic. Raw ownership likely to be in the 5 to 10% range for the most part. Addison Barger, 4,200, third base outfield eligible. Talked about him yesterday. Want to go right back to him today. 186 expected ISO allowed to lefties by Savali this year. 233 to righties. Relatively limited sample. If you go back to last year, 156 expected ISO to lefties, 170 to righties. Strikeout percentage against righties over that span is about 7-8 points lower than against righties as well. So you have seen some reverse splits going back to last season from Savali. Strikeout percentage against lefties is higher this year as well. But Addison Barger at 4,200, even though he hits left-handed, I don't really care about Savali's reverse splits. He's just too cheap. He has multi-position eligibility. 401 expected ISO, 401 expected WOBA, 289 expected ISO for Barger against right-handed pitching this season. So he looks good. He's getting about 8% ownership, about a 12% chance of being optimal. People asking about the weather in this one. Yeah, there's no like clear washouts from a weather standpoint right now, but I do think that of the games on the main slate, this is the one that you probably need to keep the closest eye on as we get closer to lock. If lock were now, I'd be playing it, but definitely the potential for it to get ugly later. Chris said, do these packages also include your favorite prop bets every slate? No, they don't. We're still working on testing out some prop stuff behind the scenes. So they don't right now. Those are probably coming soon. For NFL, we do already have prop stuff set up. For MLB, it's still a work in progress. So if you have your own like model, obviously you can upload the detailed projections into that, but we don't have our own prop stuff right now. Again, still testing that out before we release it publicly. I do use these as part of, for example, the strikeout props that I personally do and give out through my Dub Club. The link for that is also in the description below. I do use our projections as part of that, but it's not included with anything that we do right now. I will obviously let everyone know when we finalize that and do release it publicly. Vlad Guerrero, 11% chance of being optimal. Springer, 11%. Again, reverse splits for Savali, ton of power allowed to right-handed hitters. Like getting to both of those guys, tons of power there. Guerrero, obviously, kind of got off to a slow start this season, but it's Vlad Guerrero. You know what you're getting from him. He's up to a 189 expected ISO against righties now. George Springer this season, this I feel like just isn't getting talked about, but 416 expected WOBA, 300 expected ISO. He had seemingly kind of fallen off a cliff, was aging, was just not going to be around that much longer as a productive player. He found something to set the clocks back and get back to being an elite hitter, at least through the first half of this season. So don't look at that $5,200 salary on Springer and kind of just ignore it and think it's a mispricing. He has fully earned that so far this season. Alejandro Kirk, 9% ownership, 9% chance of being optimal at 3,800. Clement at 3,400 looks like a pretty good value. Bo Bichette, $4,500 shortstop, looks pretty good. 7% chance of being optimal at 5% owned. You do have 10% ownership coming into Will Wagner, 14% right now coming into Nathan Lucas. Those are guys that I think might go a little bit over-owned because their value point per dollar projection ends up driving them up a little bit. I think they're also probably guys that I bumped in my ownership projections as a result of how they look in Sims tools right now. But overall, I do think Toronto, again, going to be one of the more popular offenses, but that's still like, 10% ownership to a bunch of guys. You can still pretty easily navigate your way around that. That is, obviously just a nice thing about 13-game slates. The negative is obviously that there's just going to be random plays that hit 2 home runs and steal a base, and you have to have them probably to win a large field tournament, and that's just how it is, and it's a pain in the ass. The positive is it is kind of more fun to be able to just play, hey, I want to play the Red Sox against the god-awful Rockies pitching in Fenway. I'm going to do that. I want to play the Blue Jays against Aaron Savali. I'm going to do that. Whereas, when you get your 5, 6, 7-game slates, like last night, for example, where it was 9 games, but you just had 20 to 30% ownership coming into Red Sox. It's a lot of, in those situations, just being like, shit, I'm fully aware that this is the best spot to get to, but I'm not going to play it because I'm trying to get paid when things go my way, as opposed to be right the most often. A slate of this size, you can kind of just say, yeah, cool, I'm going to play the Blue Jays or I'm going to play the Red Sox. So they do obviously look good here. On the White Sox side, I assume I'll be over the field just because I pretty much always am. Not a great matchup against Bassett, but again, they are cheap. There is kind of some sneaky power upside at the top of this lineup that gets slept on a little bit. There is quality value. Andrew Benintendi, you can see here, a very high point per dollar projection at only 3,200. His salary just remains relatively low because for most of his career, he hasn't hit for power, and because he's on this terrible White Sox team that always has a low Vegas total, low team total. He, loses out on some plate appearance projection because his teammates suck, etc. But he has 208 plate appearances against right-handed pitching this year, 239 expected ISO, 168 actual ISO, 349 expected WOBA, only a 14% strikeout percentage. Bassett so far this season, 167 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 124 to righties. So he's not giving up a ton of power to either side of the plate, but he has been traditional splits. Been intended getting 3% ownership, 6% chance of being optimal. So again, not a priority, but a way that you can differentiate if you need to. Same can be said for Chase Meadroth, who gives you stolen base upside. Miguel Vargas, 3,600, has some power and stolen base upside. He is only first base eligible now, though, so that hurts him a bit. Kyle Teal, $3,100 catcher, hitting in the middle of the order. Anytime you have a catcher that's cheap and hitting in the middle of the order, there's at least some appeal there because he's cheap and hitting in the middle of the order at a terrible position. So it's kind of just the usual for the White Sox for me. Clearly, you're never excited about getting to them. They're probably not going to have a good game. Chris Bassett's not a bad pitcher. But if you do need a cheap hitter that has some upside, there are guys to find on the White Sox that won't get much ownership because they're on the White Sox. Pittsburgh taking on Kansas City in Kauffman Stadium. Tough strikeout park here. Good park for offense, tough park for pitchers getting strikeouts, tough park for hitting home runs, although that was certainly not the case yesterday as Kansas City hit several of them. I believe Witt, Pasquantino, Perez all homered. I don't remember if there were any others for the Royals. Seth Lugo taking on Mitch Keller. $7,400 price tag on Keller. Not particularly interested in getting to him. Very tough strikeout matchup against Kansas City. They have the, I believe, second lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching so far this season. The only team striking out less is Toronto, 18% K percentage for the Royals. They have been a below-average offense overall offensively, but I don't really see a need to get to much $7,400 Keller. $8,800 Lugo here. We're back to normal with the way that I see Lugo right now. He's a good pitcher at preventing runs. He has a good matchup against the Pirates. He is $8,800 on a slate with 26 pitchers, getting 16% ownership. I probably just won't have quite that much of him. Now, if I get there, I think it's fine. Like, I understand why he's getting ownership. The matchup against the Pirates is good. They are not a good offense. They rank 8th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They rank 28th in WRC+. The only offenses that have been less productive against right-handed pitching are the White Sox and the Rockies. So I get it. Like, Seth Lugo is certainly not a bad play or anything like that. 22% strikeout percentage for him so far this season. 4.03 xFIP, 2.65 ERA. It's just a matter of he's getting ownership because of the favorable matchup, but I also think he's overpriced relative to his talent level. He's one of these guys where, you see it with Noah Cameron too, who obviously he's not the best example given that he was great yesterday, but from a talent standpoint, Lugo is probably a $7,500, $7,600 guy. So then you factor in the matchup with Pittsburgh. Maybe he should be like 8,100, 8,200. He's probably 10% more expensive than he should be. And he's getting ownership here. Again, park is difficult for strikeouts. So if you build a lineup you like, you have $8,800 at pitcher, by all means, click Seth Lugo. Like, it's a good spot. He'll probably have a good game. It's just that from a overall standpoint, I think the ownership is probably a little high on him, which isn't the end of the world, but it does mean that probably across my full set of lineups, I just don't have quite as much Lugo as the field. Maybe I go down to more Perez. Maybe I get to some more expensive pitchers that have better strikeout upside. Lugo is a solid, not great pitcher. You're paying a premium for the current ERA and for the matchup, which again is fine. He probably will pitch well. The Pirates absolutely suck, etc. He's relatively safe, for lack of a better word. There is no such thing as actually safe, obviously, in baseball. And I've talked about it a lot before that, like, safety actually comes in strikeouts, not in ability to limit runs generally, because somebody like Seth Lugo, and this isn't entirely true in this matchup since the Pirates will give him strikeouts, but somebody like Seth Lugo, if he just gets unlucky and some ground balls find holes, suddenly he's given up 3 runs, it's hard for him to make back those 6 fantasy points very quickly. Whereas somebody who maybe has a little bit higher ERA than Lugo, but strikes out 28% of hitters, can very quickly just say, oh, I gave up 3 runs. Here's 3 strikeouts. We're back to even, start over. Whereas Lugo is a little bit more vulnerable to just getting unlucky on balls in play, getting unlucky on earned runs, and tanking his DFS performance. So there is kind of still, not as much now, I don't think, as there was years ago, but there is still, I think, a tendency for people to feel like they're getting a little more safety than they are when they take a pitcher against a bad offense, kind of just ignore the salary and be like, yeah, but he can't do poorly. Guys like Lugo actually are more vulnerable to bad luck and low DFS scores as a result than guys that actually get a lot of strikeouts, even if they're not quite as good a pitcher in terms of run prevention. But mostly it's just floors in baseball are non-existent. But it is obviously a good matchup for Lugo. For the Pirates, not super interested in getting to them. I do think they're probably going a little bit under-owned here. It is a good park for offense overall. They are cheap for the most part. O'Neill Cruz accepted, but they are still the Pirates. They are still a bad offense. I think they're kind of similar to the White Sox, where clearly you're not expecting much out of them. For the most part, they're not very good, and Lugo's not terrible, but they are mostly cheap. They are in a park that's good for extra base hits, other than home runs. It's good for scoring runs in general. Lugo this year has allowed a 234 expected ISO to lefties, only 148 to righties. So O'Neill Cruz actually in a pretty decent spot here at no ownership. Brian Reynolds, 3,600, getting 3% ownership, about a 6% chance of being optimal so far this year against right-handed pitching. 178 expected ISO for Reynolds. That's about 65 points higher than his 111 actual ISO in 270 plate appearances. So you're getting, Brian Reynolds, somebody that has a track record of being a quality major league hitter. You're getting a very cheap price on him because in part he's been very unlucky seemingly so far this year. 280 actual WOBA compared to 343 expected, 111 actual ISO compared to 178 expected. So that's a spot where, if you want a contrarian cheap outfielder, you could target against Lugo. O'Neill Cruz, 271 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year. Clearly, the highest projected guy on the Pirates, but you are paying for it. Nick Gonzalez, 3,500, probably batting in the middle of the order at second base. There's nothing exciting about him, but he is cheap, low owned, and probably in the middle of the order. For Kansas City, on the other side against Keller, relatively low total for them, coming in at around 4.5. A little surprised by that one. Not that I think, Keller's a terrible pitcher or anything. I just sort of expected you'd see a little bit higher total here. For the Royals, you're getting about 15% projected ownership coming into Bobby Witt at 5,400. 10% chance of being optimal. I don't really mind that ownership too much. It's Bobby Witt. He gives you stolen base upside. He gives you power upside, etc. Keller has been very, very good at limiting production to right-handed hitters in particular this year. 22.5% K percentage, 264 expected WOBA, 122 expected ISO, sub 100 actual ISO allowed. So it is a tough matchup for Witt, but again, tons of talent and really a price tag that doesn't quite live up to the actual upside that and talent that Witt has. I don't think, like 5,400 is obviously just relatively expensive, but for Bobby Witt, I think that's a little bit cheaper than he probably should be. Outside of him, Kansas City's pretty cheap. 3,200 to Salvador Perez, who been harping on it all year long, has hit into a lot of bad luck. You're seeing some more power from him lately. 201 ISO now against right-handed pitching, 246 expected. So you have seen that ISO come up. Still some room to go, probably. Catcher, first base eligible, cheap power upside there. India, 3,500. Garcia, 4,300. Caglione, we know, has a lot of raw power at 2,800. So there is some power upside here, but again, not a great park for home runs. Keller's been pretty solid at limiting power. I mentioned the numbers against righties. Lefties have been better, only striking out 15.5% of the time. 167 expected ISO, 373 expected WOBA. So not horrible numbers against lefties, but certainly worse than against righties. Kansas City, outside of Witt, basically getting like 2 to 5% ownership across the board. So another just kind of middle of the road team, I think. They're not the best offense on this slate, but they do give you some quality point per dollar projections. You can see here a lot of these guys coming in around like over, 2x. So at lower ownership than a team like the Red Sox. So not the same, certainly not the same park for hitting home runs or anything compared to the Red Sox at Fenway. Not as good a matchup, but you do get very high point per dollar ceilings for this Kansas City team, given how cheap they are. Washington taking on the Cardinals in St. Louis. My God, there's a lot of games on this slate. My internal clock is like, oh yeah, you should be wrapping up. And then I just realized there's more games that I need to talk about. Washington taking on St. Louis in St. Louis. Sonny Gray on the mound for the Cards at 9,700. Jake Irvin going for Washington. No real interest in Irvin here. He has taken a pretty big step back this year after taking a step forward last year. 105 innings pitched, only a 17% strikeout percentage, down 3.5 points from last year. His command has been good and actually better than last year, but his stuff has dropped off. His strikeouts have dropped off. He's lost nearly 2 miles an hour on his fastball. Tough strikeout matchup against the Cards as well. Sonny Gray on the other side, only projected around 6 to 7% ownership here at $9,700, 10% chance of being optimal. I do think he's a way you can be contrarian on this slate at SP1 if you want to. I think you're going to see more ownership come into Hunter Brown. I think you're going to see a bit more ownership come in to Robbie Ray. And as a result, you can go to a good pitcher in Gray. Now, you have seen some regression this year from Gray compared to past years, but he's still very good. 26.8% K percentage this year. That's down from 30.3% last year, but it's still very good. His location plus grade, 102.3. That's down 3 points from last year, but still above average. His stuff plus grade is down slightly, but still pretty close to last year. Fastball velo is down 0.5 mile an hour from last year. So you have seen a step back in most categories from Gray, but still having a good season. It's not an easy matchup against the Nats. This is a team that their offensive ability isn't really in line with their record or even like their average production necessarily. Like it's almost a team where it's hard to describe. It's like the individual parts equal more than the whole, sort of. They ranked 23rd in WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year, but it's a lineup where at the top of it, you have to deal with CJ Abrams, who has been the best hitting shortstop in the National League. You have to deal with James Wood, who's been one of the best hitters in baseball, period. Luis Garcia is not a bad hitter. Nathaniel Lowe is not a bad hitter. Josh Bell's not a bad hitter. And then the bottom of the lineup is just dog shit. Like really young, unproven, prospects. Brady House is a prospect, but probably not quite ready for the majors yet. So it's when you look at like the average, it's kind of skewed by some really unproductive guys at the bottom of the order. But the guys you're facing the most are actually legitimately good, in particular, CJ Abrams and James Wood. So I wouldn't say it's like a safe matchup or a good matchup necessarily for Gray, but certainly talented, not getting a lot of ownership. You don't have to go back very far to see the upside that he still offers through like 89 pitch complete game with like 11 strikeouts a couple starts ago. He still has the ability to go out there and put up some huge games. So definitely somebody to consider if you need a low owned, high upside SP1. But I wouldn't call him a priority in the sense that I do think that there are SP1s that project better and that deserve more ownership. Looking at the bats here, starting on the the Washington side rather, against Gray, nothing that really stands out. It's one of these spots where the matchup is tough. There's plenty of worse pitchers to target on the slate. If you want to play some low-owned CJ Abrams or James Wood, obviously, it's always nice. It's another nice thing of 13-game slates. You can differentiate and be very contrarian by playing some of the best, most talented hitters on the slate. CJ Abrams, 178 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year, but also plenty of stolen base upside. James Wood, 303 expected ISO against right-handed pitching. Luis Garcia is at 198. Nathaniel Lowe, 173. Josh Bell, 218. There's a lot of power, 1 through 5 here at zero ownership, basically. So if you wanted to go for it, you can. But obviously, there's just more appealing spots to get to. I can't see anything about St. Louis because a SaberSim screen just decided to reload for absolutely no reason. As far as Jake Irvin, though, it is a pretty favorable matchup here for the Cards. You have around a 5-team total. Irvin has really struggled with power this year. 280 expected ISO to left-handed hitters, only a 16.5% K percentage. 204 expected ISO to right-handed hitters, about a 17% K percentage. So getting to some Cardinals power bats here does make sense. 197 expected ISO against right-handed hitters for Brendan Donovan. Alec Burleson, 208 expected ISO. Contreras, 205. Gorman, 249. Does come with some pinch hit risk, but I do like power upside here for the Cards, and they're relatively inexpensive as well. 2.2 point per dollar projection for Burleson really stands out at 3,900. The home run projection for Burleson, Nootbaar, Gorman, Contreras, Donovan, all pretty appealing here. There is modest pinch hit risk on some guys, but nothing that stands out as too, concerning at all here. I actually was expecting it to be a little bit higher. So I do think the Cards look, pretty decent here. Just got my SaberSim screen reloaded for St. Louis bats. Nothing that really stands out as a priority. They actually right now look like they're going a little bit over-owned. 13% ownership coming into Donovan, 9% to Burleson, 6% to Contreras. But again, nothing too concerning there. Cardinals look fine. The matchup against Irvin is a good one. Atlanta taking on the A's in Sacramento. Didier Fuentes going for the Braves at 5,300. Jeffrey Springs going for the A's at 6,300. Accidentally just skipped to the last game of the night because, again, our stuff is out of order for some reason, but we'll talk about it anyway. Braves have like a 5.5 total. A's coming in north of 5 as well. Should be good, favorable hitting conditions here. Plenty of run scoring opportunities. I think this game looks very good offensively. Not super exciting from a pitching standpoint. Fuentes at 5,300 in a pretty good strikeout matchup if you need to pay all the way down, but you probably won't. Springs, similarly, the Braves haven't hit very well for the most part lately. He is cheap at 6,300, but there is a lot of just known quality hitting in the Braves lineup. This isn't a game that I expect to be targeting pitching very heavily on the slate. I do think I'll be getting to plenty of bats. Austin Riley, $4,400 price tag, still cheap, has the platoon advantage here against Springs. Springs is somebody that, like, earlier in his career was actually pretty solid against right-handed pitching, had a very, very good changeup. So far this year, though, has allowed a 185 expected ISO to righties, 150 to lefties, 20% K percentage against righties, 17% against lefties. So he's still not like horrible against righties by any stretch, but he hasn't been great against them either. I do like Austin Riley here. Going back to the start of last season, Riley against left-handed pitching, 232 expected ISO in 202 plate appearances. That's going to look pretty good. $6,300 Ronald Acuna, getting 22% ownership, about a 15% chance of being optimal. Obviously, it's Ronald Acuna. He's going to look good. Ozzie Albies, not a very good hitter anymore, apparently. Seems to have gotten his contract where everybody thought he was getting ripped off and decided to rip off the Braves instead. But as a result, he is cheap at 3,600, probably hitting in the middle or, top 2/3 of the order on a team with a very high total. So good point per dollar play there. Olsen, lefty-lefty against Springs. I don't mind going to that. Olsen hits left-handed pitching well. Springs is fine against lefties, but not lights out or anything like that. And then you probably get, favorable matchups later on in the game for Olsen, who's only $5,100. You can see the very high home run projections here on Acuna, on Riley, on Olsen, on Ozuna, even on Albies, Murphy. Tons of home run upside in this park for the Braves. Ozuna, Murphy, Profar, Harris. These guys all look like solid plays here. I expect to get to the Braves a lot. I expect they'll be popular. You're getting basically like 14 or 15 plus % ownership to Riley, Acuna, Ozuna, and Murphy. Around 10% to Albies, Olsen, Profar, most of this lineup. So they will be one of the most popular teams, but I think it's also warranted against the A's in this park. On the Oakland side, less ownership there, 5 to 10% coming into Rooker, Butler, Kurtz, Langoliers, less than that to pretty much everyone else. I'm less interested in them as well, although you certainly can make the case for, they're in the same park. Maybe pair them with Atlanta or just play them separately at less ownership. But still solid home run projections here on Butler, Rooker, Kurtz, Soderstrom, but not nearly as high as we had on the Braves. Limited sample for Fuentes so far this season, only a few appearances, 110 pitches thrown to lefties, 143 to righties. Has allowed big-time expected power numbers so far, but again, very limited sample there. So I would say the A's are another one of these teams where, in my head, they look a little bit better than in, the way that they're showing up in lineups I built before the show. But also, there's a million good offenses to get to, and if they get squeezed out, then so be it. Now looping back to the games over here. Cleveland taking on Houston. This is a game that starts at 8:10 Eastern. For the Astros, we have Hunter Brown kind of burying the lead here on pitching. For the Guardians, we have Joey Cantillo. Cantillo coming in at 7K. Middle of the road matchup against Houston. Not a great projection here. I think on some slates, I'd be interested. He is somebody that gives you strikeout upside based on what we've seen so far in the majors and during his time in the minors. But like I was talking about before, you just have pitchers that are cheaper that are better point per dollar plays. You have pitchers that are more expensive that obviously project better. So not somebody I'm likely to get too much of here. Hunter Brown, likely to get a lot of ownership. My ownership projection on him right now is a bit higher than the industry. I have 44% ownership projected to him. Depending on where you look across the industry, it's anywhere from like 20 to 35%. So he's going to be popular. It's just a matter of how much. And I do think it's warranted. Like, on the one hand, compared to optimal percentage, I think he's going quite a bit over-owned, but it's still one spot in your lineup. He still projects well. He's a very, very good pitcher, good strikeout pitcher. You've seen big improvements from him so far this year as well. In the past, he was somebody that had really good stuff, and was a decent strikeout pitcher, but not as good as he probably should be. And then this year, you've seen him kind of put it all together. Strikeout percentage has gone from 25% last year to 32% this year. Stuff plus grade is up 5 points. Command has been about the same. Fastball velo is up a mile per hour as well. So Hunter Brown is going to look very good here. He is $11,000 though, so he is expensive. There are obviously plenty of cheap stacks that we can get to. Happy to get the Hunter Brown where I can. And one other thing I've talked about with this Guardians team as well, if you look at their strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching overall this year, they rank 14th at 21.7%. But they're a weird lineup where that's going to get pulled down a little bit by guys like Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez. They have some high K guys in this lineup that Brown can take advantage of. So it's not one of these lineups where, like, across the board, it's difficult strikeouts. It's more so it's a lineup where Kwan is tough to strike out. Ramirez is tough to strike out. There's a couple other guys around 19, 20%. But then you get other guys that will just go up there and can Hunter Brown strikeouts. So it is overall and actually a pretty decent strikeout spot for Hunter Brown. His stuff, again, is incredible. Interesting interview with him during a game the other day, too, where he was just talking about, just came off as very intelligent, too, like talking about his approach to pitching, how like one thing that he's kind of found this year and figured out and been able to exploit is even when he doesn't have his best stuff, then you can kind of like pivot and figure out how to take advantage of not having your best stuff. Like what are hitters expecting you to have? What are hitters expecting you to throw? And if you know that like, your curveball isn't as good as usual today, how can you play off of that with what hitters think you have and take advantage of it? So kind of just like thinking, a step ahead, sort of just like a game theory angle, strategic approach. Always nice to see something like that from pitchers as opposed to, guys where, oh, I don't have my stuff today. Oh, shit, like I'm screwed. It's nice to know that, kind of even when he's not going to have his best stuff, he's going to be able to think his way through it and still have success, most likely. So if you can get to Hunter Brown, great. Offensively here, starting on the Guardian side, not going to be particularly interested there. I don't really think there's a whole lot to say. Clearly, Jose Ramirez is good. Steven Kwan is good. Hunter Brown also is really good. And you have plenty of other offensive spots to get to. 35% K percentage against lefties for Brown this year. 125 expected ISO. 29% K percentage to righties. 119 expected ISO. There's nothing that really even stands out as a weakness to target against Hunter Brown. On the other side, against Cantillo, limited sample so far in the majors this year. 157 expected ISO to righties, 153 to lefties, above average K percentage to both sides of the plate, much higher to lefties as you would expect. Going back to last year, 30% K percentage to lefties, 27% to righties. Now, some of this is out of the bullpen, so you do expect it to come down as a starter. But again, just not a spot where I expect to be wanting to get to a ton of Houston against him. You do have a park that plays up right-handed power. You do have plenty of right-handed, relatively inexpensive power bats for Houston. Diaz, 3,600. Paredes, 4,500. Altuve's up to 5K now, which sucks. Also, I don't think you're going to have Christian Walker. I don't remember if it was bereavement or paternity. I think paternity list, but Christian Walker not with the team. So you're not going to have him, I don't think. That obviously weakens the lineup a bit as well. Saberson page just refreshed again for no reason, but nothing that stands out as a priority for me or for the field right now. Next, we have the Rangers taking on the Angels in Anaheim. Nathan Eovaldi going for Texas. Jose Soriano going for the Angels. This is an interesting one for me. Again, I don't really know what to do with Jose Soriano's projection at this point. He's getting 7% ownership at 7,300, showing up as optimal 8% of the time. I cannot figure out what, if anything, he changed, but he has been out there piling up strikeouts over his last handful of starts. This is somebody that's always been an elite ground ball pitcher, and he's had very, very good stuff. He averages nearly 100 miles an hour on his sinker, but he never really turned it into strikeouts until recently. Obviously, you don't pick DFS players by just looking at game logs, but to illustrate my point here, his last 5 starts, 12 strikeouts in 7 innings against the A's, 6 in 7 innings against the Yankees, 10 in 6 2/3 against Houston, 4 in 4 against the Nats, and then 7 in 7 against the Braves. You're seeing him get more strikeouts, and I can't find a difference in his release point. I can't find a difference in his stuff, either in what he's throwing or in the quality of it. it could be a like pitch tunneling improvement. That's something that I don't really have a way to, you know, quantify or see. It could also be, and I've mentioned this before, just an intent change. Because again, Soriano has always had the stuff. If you look at what Soriano throws and how hard he throws it, he's somebody that should be able to just go out there and say, hey, I want to get some strikeouts. I'm going to get some strikeouts. And we have seen plenty of times over the years where either pitchers themselves or organizations prioritize getting weak contact, ground balls, quick outs over getting strikeouts. So there is the possibility that for whatever reason, the Angels or Soriano decided 5 starts ago, okay, I don't care so much about, like, I'm still obviously going to get ground balls because I have a nasty sinker at 100 miles an hour, but that's not what I'm going to try and do every at bat now. I'm going to try and get strikeouts. Maybe it's as simple as that. But he has been striking guys out more. I don't know how to quantify that. I don't know. I'm not going to just go in and say, oh, yeah, suddenly he's, a 28% K guy when he's been a 20% guy for his whole career. But I do think at the very least there is more volatility, a higher ceiling on Soriano than maybe I would have thought 10 starts ago. And you do have a pretty decent matchup here against Texas. Seager is healthy. Langford is back. So it is a relatively healthy Rangers lineup. They haven't been good so far this year, but they do have plenty of quality hitters in it. But Soriano at 7,300, I do at the very least think is interesting here. You can see we have a pretty decent projection on him around 2x anyway. And I think you can make the case maybe that strikeout projection should go up a little bit just based on what we've seen from him in his most recent starts. Evaldi on the other side, very good strikeout matchup for him. He is $10,000 though, 6.5% projected ownership to Evaldi, about a 10% chance of being optimal. Not a great strikeout pitcher, but not a bad one either. Coming into tonight, you have a 27% strikeout percentage in 77 innings pitched for Evaldi. That is up 3 points from last year. Very good command. 94 mile an hour fastball is down about 1.5 miles since last year, but obviously he's been effective. You get a very good strikeout matchup here against the Angels, although obviously Jacob deGrom would have you believe otherwise. Devin just mentioned it in chat. 9K Evaldi, I'd be all over it. 10K, I think he's in that same bucket with Sonny Gray. Looks very, very similar to me, where he's probably getting like 5 to 8% ownership somewhere in there. He's around 10% to be optimal. People are going to go to Robbie Ray first. They're going to go to Hunter Brown first. And there is a very high ceiling for Evaldi. He's somebody that generally is able to work pretty deep into games as well. He's generally pretty pitch efficient, doesn't walk a lot of guys, very good command, good strikeout matchup again. So I think he's very similar to Gray in that he's a little more expensive than I would like, but he still has the ability to rack up strikeouts, give you 7 innings against this Angels team. Looking at the offenses here, it is a good park for offense. I don't love getting to either one, though. Soriano, again, very, very good ground ball pitcher, one of the highest ground ball percentages in baseball amongst qualified starting pitchers, if not the highest. I've mentioned the outcomes metric that I have that looks for pitchers to get strikeouts, ground outs, or infield pop-ups. Jose Soriano this year, if I could find him. Jose Soriano this year, basically half a standard deviation better than league average, despite having a 20% strikeout percentage and me weighting strikeouts the highest in that metric. It just speaks to how good he is at getting ground balls. And then again, if he is going to get more strikeouts now, it's going to just go up. Corey Seager is cheap at 4,400. Semien has remembered how to hit. He's 4,300. They're both around 5-6% to be optimal. So is Langford. So is Josh Smith. The only guy getting ownership here is Seager at about 8%, but nothing that really stands out to me because Soriano is so good at getting ground balls, doesn't give up a lot of power. Lefties so far this season, only a 124 expected ISO against Soriano, only 121 expected ISO for righties. Righties have also struck out 25% of the time compared to 17% for lefties. Texas's projected lineup is likely to be pretty balanced. Semien, Garcia, Langford, Berger, Higashioka, if they're in there. From the right side, Carter, Heim, Seager, Smith would all be left-handed. So we'll have to see, but the more righties in the lineup for Texas, certainly the higher strikeout projection for Soriano. On the other side for the Angels, there is a lot of home run power here, in addition to there being a lot of strikeouts. But Evaldi, not a pitcher that I generally love taking hitters against. 5K for Zach Neto, 4,800 for Mike Trout, about a 3% chance of being optimal for those guys. That's the highest on the slate. 126 expected ISO for right-handed hitters against Eovaldi, 203 for lefties so far, but still a 27% strikeout percentage there. And you don't really have left-handed power in this lineup anyway. So not much interest in the bats. Arizona taking on the Padres in San Diego. For the Padres, it is Nick Pivetta. For the Diamondbacks, it is Merrill Kelly. Very tough matchup for both of these guys. Pretty expensive salaries as well. $9,800 for Pivetta, $8,600 for Kelly. About 8% projected ownership coming into Pivetta. We do actually have that a little bit low, about a 14% chance of being optimal. He does have very good strikeout stuff. So it is a tough matchup against Arizona. They've been a very productive offense this year. Pivetta has struck out about 28% of hitters so far. His command has been absolutely elite. A little bit of a drop-off in stuff for him this season. Stuff plus grade down 3.5 points. Still league average, but a huge bump in command, going from a 106.7 location plus grade last year, which was already good, up to 114.2 this year. He's had the best command on this slate. He's had the best command of any pitcher pitching today outside of Logan Gilbert. So I do think you can look at Pivetta similarly to guys like Sonny Gray and Nathan Eovaldi. A little more expensive than I would like, especially given the matchup. Arizona against right-handed pitching this year, 18th in K percentage, 4th in WRC plus. But Pivetta is a very good pitcher, certainly capable of going out there and giving you a very good start at low ownership. More difficult to get to Kelly, I think, on the other side. We have seen a nice jump in strikeout percentage from him this season. He's never been a great strikeout pitcher in the majors, but this year he's gone from 21% last year up to 24.5% this year. Stuff plus is very similar to last year. Command is a little bit better, but pretty similar. Fastball velo is the same, but he's thrown 104 innings, so you can start to just buy in to that increase in strikeout percentage. But the matchup here against the Padres is very tough. They have the third lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching so far this season. Only Kansas City and Toronto has struck out less. Washington is fourth lowest, by the way, going back to that Sonny Gray matchup. So it's tough, I think, to want to get to an $8,600 Kelly in that spot. San Diego offensively also middle of the road, 101 WRC plus, but also probably a team that you expect to do better going forward than they have year to date, given just the talent that you have with Tatis, with Merrill, with Cronenworth. A rise is obviously impossible to strike out. Has taken a big hit in terms of actual production, though. Manny Machado, obviously a very good hitter. But one thing about the Padres that makes them tough, too, they're different. They're like the opposite of what I was saying with Cleveland. San Diego has a low strikeout percentage as a team, and it's like every hitter, at least at the top and in the middle of the order. Like a rise obviously pulls it down because he never strikes out, but Tatis doesn't strike out a ton. Machado doesn't strike out. Merrill doesn't strike out. There's only a couple guys in their usual lineup that actually have above average strikeout rates. So it's tough to want to get to Kelly there. Offensively, I think both of these teams just kind of fall into that same bucket of they're talented and they won't be very popular. So if you want to mix them in, fine, but there's nothing that really stands out to prioritize, I don't think. They both have power hitters. They both have some speed. We did have Ketel Marte scratched yesterday, but he is likely to play today. We will want to keep an eye, obviously, on that lineup, though. But looking at the bats in this game, Marte, Suarez, 4 to 5% chance of being optimal. That's the high mark for Arizona. So far this season, 168 expected ISO allowed to lefties for Pivetta, 214 to righties. So there is that. You know, he is relatively susceptible to home runs, and that's been the case for him basically his entire career. So if he doesn't have his best stuff, you can take advantage of that by doing damage. He's not one of these high strikeout pitchers that does a really good job of limiting the quality of contact. If you hit the ball against him, he does give up hard hit fly balls. So, you know, Marte, Suarez, Carroll, these guys all have big time power. 318 expected ISO against right-handed pitching for Carroll this year. 314 for Marte, 196 for Naylor, 266 for Suarez, 207 for McCarthy in a limited sample. There are power bats in this lineup if you want to go that route. On the other side, against Kelly, 187 expected ISO to lefties, 173 to righties. So not the same power issues that Pivetta has had, but not perfect either if you want to go to Tatis, Machado, Sheets, Merrill, but nothing that looks like a priority given all of the good spots that we do have on this slate. Philadelphia taking on the Giants in San Francisco. I missed the Yankees game earlier. I will get back to that one. So we do have Gilbert on the slate. I thought he was and missed him earlier. But Philadelphia taking on San Francisco in this one. Robbie Ray facing off against Taijuan Walker. No interest in Taijuan Walker here at 6,200. Not a very good pitcher. The only good thing to say here is the game is in San Francisco. Great park to pitch in. I have under 2.5 strikeouts at plus 120. Don't have any interest in Taijuan Walker. Robbie Ray, projected for around 13% ownership, showing up as optimal around 20% of the time. $10,500 price tag on him. I do think we have him projected. Yeah, we have him projected a little bit higher than other places in the industry. We're actually a little bit lower on Hunter Brown, which I find interesting because for a lot of the season, we've been a little lower on Gray and higher on Brown. Now we obviously still have a very good projection on Brown, but that's kind of flipped. So with the way ownership is projected right now, I find Robbie Ray really interesting in tournaments. 13%, like 11 to 13% projected ownership at a couple places. It is higher at SaberSim. SaberSim has him basically the same ownership as Brown. Other places have him like half the ownership or a third of the ownership. Right now, I have it that way as well. So I will be interested to see exactly how that ends up shaking out as the day goes on. But I think their ownership should be similar. I think they have a very similar range of outcomes. I think Brown's the better pitcher, but he's also $500 more expensive. Ray is pitching in San Francisco, which is nice. You get this Giants lineup that has plenty of strikeouts in it. Since the start of last season, against Philly's lineup is not ideal. Flip the teams in my head, but 18th in strikeout percentage for Philadelphia since last year. If Ray were facing the Giants, that would be amazing in this park. The matchup itself is not great, but the park is good. Ray has his flaws, walks too many guys, throws too many pitches, etc. 27% strikeout percentage is down 6 points this year from last year. His stuff plus grade is down 7 points. His command has been a bit better, though. Still below average, but much better than last year. But I know that we factor, stuff into our models and all of that. So it's not like I'm going to look at that stuff plus grade and then downgrade our projection on him. I know it's already included. So I'll be interested to see, one, how our projections end up finalizing between Brown and Ray, and then also how ownership projections end up. But one way or the other, very high upside for Ray, even in a less than perfect matchup. For the offenses, I wouldn't expect to get too much of Philadelphia. They are talented offensively, obviously, but this park is terrible for scoring runs. It's bad for hitting home runs. The matchup against Ray is obviously not ideal, especially when you consider that Ray's biggest flaw is basically walks and being inefficient, not things that really lead to a lot of fantasy production against him. Only a 156 expected ISO allowed to righties this year, 113 to lefties. So not really interested in the Phillies. The Giants do have a much better matchup against Taijuan Walker. The problem is, of course, the park. Walker so far this season, not allowing any power to lefties, though. Sub 100 expected ISO, 191 expected ISO to righties. If you want to get to some Ramos, some Chapman, I think that's fine. Obviously, don't let the small sample size splits deter you from getting to Rafi Devers either. But the park is the biggest deterrent here. Makes it tough to really want to get there. And then wrapping this one up with the first game on the slate that I missed earlier, Yankees hosting the Seattle Mariners. Logan Gilbert going for the Mariners. Will Warren going for the Yankees. Huge park downgrade for Logan Gilbert. Very, very risky spot. The Yankees are one of the best offenses in baseball. That goes without saying. They're tied for second in WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year. They rank 7th in strikeout percentage, so it is a good K spot. But you're getting not only a park downgrade in terms of run prevention, T-Mobile Park in Seattle, very tough place to score runs, tough place to hit home runs, whereas Yankee Stadium is good for both. T-Mobile is also the best place for getting strikeouts, I believe. If not, it's one of the best. So you're getting a downgrade in strikeouts specifically as well. Still, very, very talented pitcher, $9,500 price tag, 17% projected ownership, 16% chance of being optimal. Looks like a good play. He's seen a huge jump in strikeout percentage so far this year through his first 50 innings pitched. 36.8% K percentage this year compared to 27.4% last year. Command has been even better this year. 116.2 location plus grade compared to 112.5 last year. And I dug into his strikeout stuff a little bit on a previous show as well. There's reason to believe that it's for real, just based on what we've seen in terms of pitch type. He's throwing so far this season against right-handed hitters. he's thrown his splitter 27% of the time. By comparison, last year he threw it about 13% of the time. 24% swinging strike percentage on it last year to righties, 27.5%, 28% so far this year. It's a thing that pitchers tend to not do immediately. Guys that have good splitters, good changeups, they're generally hesitant to throw it to same-handed hitters. You've seen it in a number of different pitchers over the years. And then somebody gets in their head and says, hey, you should actually do this. And then they start doing it and their strikeout percentage skyrockets. It's what won Kevin Gausman a Cy Young was, one, getting it in his head. He needed to just throw a splitter, period. And then two, getting it in his head to throw it to right-handed hitters and not just to lefties. Basically single-handedly won Kevin Gausman a Cy Young. And then you're seeing this massive jump in strikeout percentage for Gilbert. Now, I'm not saying he continues to strike out 37% of hitters, but I do buy into him going from an already very good strikeout pitcher to an elite strikeout pitcher just based on, hey, let's throw this nasty pitch to both sides of the plate and not just half of the hitters that we face. So scary spot, big park downgrade. Would love Gilbert as much as you can against the Yankees. If this game were in Seattle, still like him here in New York. 19% ownership coming into Will Warren at 8K, about 11% chance of being optimal for him. Good strikeout pitcher, decent spot here against the Mariners, decent strikeout spot, but also a scary spot in terms of production. 28.7% K percentage is higher than every pitcher on this slate, with the exception of Gilbert on the other side and Hunter Brown in 84 innings pitched this year. So plenty of talent here for Warren, but you are getting a big park upgrade for the Mariners as well. Pretty volatile boom or bust spot, I think. Seattle ranks 11th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They also rank 6th in WRC+. Warren so far this season, striking out 23% of lefties, 35% of righties. So you will want to pay attention to exactly how this Seattle lineup is set up against him. The more right-handed hitters, obviously, the better. You probably have a lefty-heavy lineup, which, again, isn't ideal. Crawford, Raleigh, Polanco, Raley, Canzone, Cole Young, if he's in the lineup, all left-handed. So potentially only a few righties in this lineup. But if you do just, for whatever reason, get more righties, that is certainly better. Lefties so far this season against him have a 165 expected ISO. Not great, not bad, just kind of there. But obviously a big park upgrade for these Seattle left-handed bats in Yankee Stadium compared to T-Mobile Park. Righties have done nothing against it. 103 expected ISO to go along with that 35% strikeout percentage, 264 expected WOBA. I am interested in the Mariners here, especially if they do give you that left-handed heavy lineup, though. They're not projected for much ownership. 6% projected to Cal Raleigh, 10% chance of being optimal, despite that $6,200 price tag. And then sub 5% to pretty much everybody else. Raleigh is the guy driving most of my Mariners interest, which should go without saying because he's incredible. But there is power here and this big park upgrade. Raleigh 294 expected ISO against right-handed pitching rather. 195 for Polanco, 164 for Raley, 306 in a limited sample for Canzone, but he's cheap anyway. I am interested in the Mariners, but specifically Cal Raleigh really looks good, I think, against Warren. So could see playing both sides of this one across a set of lineups, given the massive power upside the Mariners have in Yankee Stadium, but also just the moderately priced strikeout upside that Will Warren has as well. So to recap everything, now that I have actually hit on all 13 games, highest projected pitchers. Actually, I'll catch up on a couple questions that I missed. Gregory Lynch said, playing on FanDuel in the 333, pitchers should be looking at. So if we look at FanDuel projections, get off this game, sort by projection. So again, rostering one pitcher, like at the top, you have the Ray, Brown, Gilbert, Pivetta kind of grouping. Ownership probably comes in heaviest to Ray and Brown. I think so. It kind of is going to depend on one, exactly how you feel about Ray versus Brown. Do you think that they're equal, or do you prefer Brown? So that would be one question, and then exactly how do ownership projections end up coming in there. But if you can pay up, you're going to go to probably one of those guys. From a value standpoint, you can go down the list a little bit. You have, $8,300 Will Warren if you need a cheaper guy. You have Bayo at $8,400 if you need a cheaper guy. So Bayo on FanDuel, not nearly the same favorable price tag that he is on DraftKings, but he is still facing the Rockies. So still gives you some value. Yuri Perez, if you need to go even cheaper than that. I don't think I would go cheaper than Yuri Perez. There's nothing below his 7,700 that looks remotely appealing. Freeland, Irvin, Fuentes, Nick Martinez. So yeah, I think the bottom of the range, especially if I'm playing like one lineup, would be Yuri Perez. And even that, because it's a one pitcher site, would be specifically like, I absolutely love every single hitter in my lineup. There's nothing I want to change. I have $7,700 left. I will click Yuri Perez and hope for the best. He's a much better DraftKings pitching play than FanDuel because one, he's 6K on DraftKings, but also you don't get penalized as much if he only goes like 5 innings on DraftKings, whereas on FanDuel you can't get the quality start. So probably living up in this range for the most part, and then going to like Warren Bayo as value if I need it. So getting back to DraftKings now, recapping how things look early in the day. DraftKings highest projected pitchers right now you can see on the screen. Highest optimal rates before the show. And again, this is all very subject to change as the day goes on. But Robbie Ray, Logan Gilbert, Nick Pivetta, Yuri Perez, Hunter Brown at the top. Offensively, starting at catcher. Highest projected guys on the screen. Highest optimal rates. Augustine Ramirez, Cal Raleigh, Alejandro Kirk, Sean Murphy. At first base, getting to Matt Olson, Vlad Guerrero, Michael Busch, Shohei, first base outfield, Miguel Vargas, if you need some value, offers it for the White Sox. At second base, Ozzie Albies, Xavier Edwards, Nick Gonzalez for some value, Nico Horner. Third base, Austin Riley, and then really, really flat, Addison Barger, Michael Garcia, Eugenio Suarez, Ernie Clement. It's a position where, in general, I think probably going to look to save a little bit of money, but really like Addison Barger there, really like Austin Riley as well. Shortstop, getting to Otto Lopez, Bobby Witt, Bo Bichette, Dansby Swanson, like all of those guys. In the outfield, looking at, again, Shohei Ohtani, Ronald Acuna, Jesus Sanchez, George Springer, Kyle Stowers, Marcell Ozuna, Seiya Suzuki, PCA. If you play for the Braves, you play for the Cubs, you're named Jesus Sanchez or George Springer or Kyle Stowers, you're looking pretty good there. The top stacks right now, Atlanta, Toronto, Miami, Chicago, Kansas City are at the top. 5-mans, Atlanta, Toronto, Miami, Chicago, again at the top. Home run pick, I will probably go to the game in Sacramento. Yeah, give me Austin Riley against Jeffrey Springs. He's at the top of our model. I like the matchup. I like the park. I like all of that. Don't forget, Emwald said, I know you'll probably hate this question, but I see you've been doing a bunch of DraftKings best ball. Will you ever stream your best ball stuff? Maybe. I've had a couple people that already stream their stuff that have asked me to come on, and I've told them maybe. I've kind of thought about it like, if I get bored over the MLB All-Star break, maybe I'll do it. Probably depends how many hours I'm just living in a poker room. But I might do some stuff over the All-Star break. I have found like DraftKings to be interesting just because of them releasing the draft data through basically the end of June. And you can do some interesting stuff with that. So maybe I'll do some stuff over the All-Star break. I'm not going to commit to it, but it is possible that I get bored and do some stuff. Cam said, missed when you talked about the White Sox weather. Are you more concerned about pitchers in that game or bats too? Kind of just playing it by ear right now. I don't really have a take. It kind of just seems like there's going to be rain in the area and who knows how strong or when. So it's definitely something I'm going to just be doubling back to later on. So that's all I have for you on this one. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Thanks for checking out the show. Subscribe to the channel. Thumbs up button. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Don't forget to use promo code UDAMLB to get 10% off MLB projections. Use code Davis to get 10% off our PGA Sims tool. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here again